The idea of drawing anything you want is a pretty enticing one. But the thing is, when you draw stuff, you still have to have elements of actual reality in your drawings, regardless of what you're styling. One of the best ways and the most challenging ways to do this is by utilizing light and shadow. Right. Light and shadow can be an extremely difficult subject to approach because everything from sprawling green field to a tiny flame has light, and everything casts shadows. I'm sure you've seen the bustlingness of a busy street wet from the rain with millions of lights and even more shadows. But how do we take something like that? How do we take something that is a principle of science, something that works entirely on its own in the real world, and stylize it, and we will utilize it in art that we do? But it's not an easy task, and it's actually really hard to master, to the point where I don't think anyone has ever mastered it. It's just a number of principles, and I guess you basically just find your style over time to doing this. In this video, I'm going to just show you how I would approach something that is definitely not realistic, and how I would light it in a way that it would make sort of sense to a person looking at it who obviously lives in the real world. Because if you light things wrong, even if the person looking at it isn't an art critic or doesn't care about the realistic aspect of drawings or doesn't care how accurate they are to the real world and how things behave, they'll still notice it because they see light on a day-to-day basis and they see shadows on a day-to-day basis. So anyone with eye will obviously notice a weirdness if you do things like super unrealistic. That being said, light and shadow is one of those elements that is very rarely stylized to the degree that other things are. You can draw a face very cartoony or any other style, but it is nearly impossible to make a light look like something different, or to make a shadow look like something different. If you draw a triangle, it will cast a triangular shadow, and if you draw a circle, it will cast a circular shadow. Well, not really, but you get what I mean. Either way, in this drawing, I'm trying to draw a person meeting a dragon, and obviously, the only realistic thing about this is the water and the mountain making. Dragons don't exist, unfortunately, and people meeting dragons would probably not fly very, very close to reality, even if dragons did exist. So how do you take this ginormous thing and make it look realistic? Because it's clearly fantastical. But first, the thing we have to ask ourselves is does it even warrant being, realistic? Like, do you need it to be realistic? The answer is no. But if you've seen any reptile, you probably can infer what a dragon might look like if dragons were real. And that is how you base the tone of its skin and how light interacts with it. At least that's what I did here. So if you know what a crocodile looks like, or a dinosaur, for example, if we know that, we can infer what a dragon's might look like in the moonlight or the starlight in this way. So obviously everything that has form in its body casts a shadow because light falls on it. But what is more interesting is when you make these shadows mildly realistic, as I've done here, where it follows the shapes that they are next to, it also builds realism in the painting. It builds a sense of urgency, sort of like, it builds a sense of like, oh, this thing is real. Okay, moving on. What is the other thing in the paint? I mean, as if I did this super unrealistically, whereas as if I just painted everything a certain color and everything was very harsh, did not look organic, people would be stuck on the dragon and be like, something is wrong about this dragon. And that is the goal of making light and shadow work in your stylized paintings. It is to make people not question what's on the canvas, to make people believe essentially that there are these elements in this piece and they all fit in well together. Where when you actually think about it, none of these things are real. So what I'm doing here is I'm removing the shadow from a bunch of places. So the first thing I did was I made the forms into like actual harsher, stronger shadows. And then I put a gradient on it. As you can see in the layers panel, I put a gradient on it to make it seem like the nighttime, because that's what happens when it's night. There's like a tinge of darkness everywhere. But the color that they actually have during the daytime do also shine through a little bit. But the reflected light you see at night is different from the direct sunlight you see during the day. So the color of the light is informed by that, which is what I'm doing here. So if the water is reflecting light onto the dragon, makes sense that the dragon's face would be a lot more lit up than the rest of its body. This makes it easier for us as artists to draw and simplify, but also it makes realistic sense. So that's what I'm doing right here. I'm giving the water a gradient and making it see like actual water. It doesn't have to be completely photorealistic. I mean, I don't think my skill set would allow for that anyway. But even if it did, what water does is reflect. If we can make it clear that it reflects something, it will look like water. So at least that's how it works for this sort of approach. Despite how weird and big this shape and things are, the reflections are pretty much just the opposite of them. So it's actually just a matter of brushing in a bunch of blobby colors. Then comes adjusting the colors so it actually fits in with the theme. So what I did was I just followed the same colors, the color spectrum that I would use for the dragon, and I just did the water the same way. Whether that makes actual sense is entirely up to the person looking at it, but what I did was just basically ballpark it and just adjust. So essentially there's a continuity in the color between the water and the dragon and the mountain and the person who stands out here, because he is a lot darker. She is a lot darker than the rest of the sea. Now is the background. The interesting thing about the background here is that it can't stand out, but it also has to have elements of light, so the piece together makes sense. Because otherwise, the weaver of this doesn't really know where the light comes from. To this side, basically just used the sparkle effect on Cube Studio and made a bunch of stuff. So it currently ties in together that it's just a starry night, and that is what's reflecting the water, and then it is what's reflecting all of the dragon. But in reality, we've made all of this out in reverse order. I did not draw the starry sky first. I drew the dragon first. So essentially what I'm doing is just faking it. I'm basically making up reasons for why the light works like this as I am going. And that is the nice thing about doing a fantasy sort of illustration, where you don't necessarily have to actually ever explain what you're doing. So currently, we are done with the drawing, and pretty much that is what my process is when it comes to kind of having the logic behind the light and the shadow. We will look at a few different examples. So this is just this drawing, and this is what I wanted to do as the main thing for this video. But outside of that, because I'm not really teaching this because I'm not a good teacher, this is sort of just what works for me. So I'll give you a little bit of, tips. Yeah, tips in kind of like just stylizing your light and shadows to make your final artwork look pretty decent. Lighting can be a challenging and complex thing when you're starting off in digital art. And over the years, because I was also once a very new person to digital art, and I'm not that experienced in it anyway, I've developed two kind of methods, not two methods really, it's just two tips I can give you to maybe have a better time starting to draw in more accurately lit drawings as could put them. So the first one is to use multiple references and to emulate real life scenarios, which I will explain. And the second one is to limit the colors you use and into a certain spectrum of colors or a certain collection of colors, which makes lighting and highlighting and shadow effects very, very easy to do, or significantly easier. I'll explain both of these using two examples of me basically using these techniques, and hope you get it. Since a lot of lighting is inferred from the real world, in fact, all of it almost is inferred from the real world, if the lighting situation is at least a little bit complex, the best way to nail it and make sure that you get things accurate is to reference, reference, and reference. You don't necessarily have to keep one reference. For example, in this drawing, I used multiple references just to make sure that I got the perspective and the lighting that falls in the buildings correctly. So that is one tip I can do. Another thing to do when looking at art and lighting in art, especially the stylized kind like we talked about in this video, is to have a range of colors that you're going to use. Have it predetermined before you even start drawing the first thing. You might have seen this in a lot of famous and non-famous art people on the internet. They have like a set of splotches of color dots on all over their canvas that they use as a guidance thing or a limitation to just use those colors on the particular drawing they're doing. And that is an immensely valuable thing you can do if you want to get lighting correctly or stylized lighting correctly. So in this drawing, you will see in a little bit that I used a very specific limit of colors, like you see on the top left of the canvas thingy. Those colors were the only colors I used for the entire drawing. That allows me to limit my range. Therefore, it also allows me to convey highlights and lows and shadows really, really accurately and really, really well in the context of the drawing. So that is another great method that I found that works for me. Those two being said, those are just techniques that work for me. And obviously, I'm sure you're very concerned that if something that I said didn't make any sense, or something that someone else on YouTube or wherever didn't make any sense about lighting, that's completely all right if you're just starting off in art, and that's even all right if you are quite already into art and still don't understand lighting that well. It takes a long time, and like I said, I don't think anyone in history has still mastered light. There are people who have extremely good understandings of it, but I don't think it's a thing that anybody has command over. Well, that being said, all these videos are going to be is just hell. And the extra mile is always up to the person who does the drawing. So go out there and experiment with different lighting situations, experiment with different artworks and experiment and try to bring your own interpretations of things onto a canvas or a digital canvas in our case. I hope you enjoyed the video, and hopefully there will be another one of these soon if you need us and kill me with work. Bye. Also, thank you for the likes and the views and the shit on the Blue Period video. Oh my god, that was so freaking... what the hell? I still don't know how to react to that.